Okay. Hi, I'm Andy Woodward, a longtime Garden Club member and former program chair. And I want to welcome you all to our first hybrid meeting, which is a combination of Zoom and in person. Trudy, can you tell us how many people you have at the library? Trudy?
She's muted.
Oh, okay. Trudy, could you unmute yourself and tell us how many people you have at the library?
How's that? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, there are 5 of us.
5. Okay.
5.
All right.
Yes.
We plan to do this the rest of the year. We will have meetings in October and in November. Our next meeting in October will be presented by Thaw Malin and Cynthia Bloomquist, whose picture we can see on the screen. We will try to do this the same way. If we don't get enough participation of people coming to the library, we probably may ditch that. But a lot of people were happy when we started having meetings again in July and August, but then we had the Delta variant hit, and then we thought we would at least try this and see if we could get people who still wanted to go to some sort of social situation, and then the rest could be at home on Zoom. So we will see what we continue. With that, I want to turn it over to Mary Lou DeLong, who will introduce our speaker.
Okay, Andy, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for that nice introduction. Welcome, James. We're delighted to have you with us. As some of you may know, we recruited James for last September, and of course, things got very confusing, and so we asked him if he would come a year later. So here we are. I think all of us who live on the vineyard are familiar with the land bank, but I expect, like me, there's a lot of things I don't know about the land bank. So it's my pleasure to introduce James. He has been the executive director of the Martha's Vineyard Land Bank since 1989. It was established first in 1986, so he has been there for most of its existence. Prior to that, he was a planner for the town of Nantucket. He will address the land bank's charter, history, goals, and future plans. So we are delighted, James, to have you with us, and you have the podium, so to speak.
Very well. Well, I appreciate the very kind welcome. And as Mary Lou said, my task today, I believe, is to explain some corners of the land bank that perhaps not all of you are familiar with. And so for lack of a better term, it might end up being some sort of land bank primer. And you'll have a lecture in land bank science. We shall see. But I will tell you, I will not be able to resist doing something idiosyncratic. I will be showing you graphics, but I will intersperse it with photos from various land bank properties that I think are intriguing. That would be, since it's idiosyncratic, you may find those photos to be unremarkable, but I happen to find them very interesting. So let's start off. Let's look at this. This, what you're seeing right now, is what the land bank has been publishing on its map now for 30 years. This is probably the best description of the land bank that I can pull together for you to review. And I only want to read a little bit of it, but I think it's worth reading some of it. Martha's Vineyard Island has witnessed unprecedented change in the most recent decades. Farming declined. Centuries-old pastures and fields were left to knot into vines and shrubs. The freedom to roam was curtailed as fences were erected across trails, beaches were gated off, and hunting was restricted. Few of these problems could be solved by planning boards and conservation commissions only. The vineyard needed a new type of land agency. In the midst of an up-spiraling building boom, island voters created the land bank in 1986 and charged it with reversing their losses. That, I think, is the key phrase. The land bank was established at a time when people felt losses and they asked the land bank to reverse their losses. And so as it goes on, I'll just summarize. The land bank has now been in existence for about 35 years and nearly 4,000 acres have been conserved. And I look at those 4,000 acres from time to time, and I know from my observations that at least 80% or more of them would be developed by now. So the land bank did accomplish something that otherwise was not going to be accomplished. And now we're up to 7% of the island, which is a nice attainment. And we try to make our money go far. But here, I think, is the core that I'm going to ask you to think about. And I will tell you in advance, these red words here, I'm going to bring them up at the end to reiterate the perspective that I'd like to share today. Here it is. The land bank is a rare breed. Neither a sanctuary program nor a park system. It is a middle ground where the highest virtues of conservation can be realized. Public enjoyment of nature, where limits and restraint secure the natural world's future and prosperity. Remember those words, rare breed, as we go forward. Okay, so here's the first photograph that I want to share with you. Okay, this is Oak Bluffs. This is, in fact, my favorite property of all the land bank properties on Martha's Vineyard. This is called Picoy Point. It was subdivided into 6 or 7 building lots. They all would have been summer houses. It has a long stretch of beach on the Major's Cove of the Central Kentucky Pond and then on the pond itself. And for those of you who may have known her, this was Linda Marinelli's old farm. I am told that many tomatoes came out of this land here. And what you see peering up over that grass are old farm implements that were left behind when she sold the property. And we think they're absolutely charming, and we like to watch them sit and rust in the field, and we let the grasses grow around them. And our goats, when they are grazing Koi Point, clear around them so that they're more visible. But this is just, I think, a lovely stretch of land. Part of the reason I like the Koi Point Preserve, and I would recommend it to those of you who haven't visited it, is that I think it's a microcosm of Martha's Vineyard. In 16 acres, you get grassland, woodland, freshwater pond, freshwater wetlands, saltwater marsh, beach. I think the only thing that's lacking is high elevation. But if you want to experience Martha's Vineyard and 16 acres is the size you're looking for, I would recommend Picoy Point to you. So the land bank came into existence in 1986 because in 1983, the Nantucket Land Bank was established. And the Nantucket Land Bank is our progenitor, and I'm going to show you some details about that in a moment. In 1983, some very far-sighted people on Nantucket brought to town meeting an article to create a Nantucket Land Bank, and it is now folklore in the town of Nantucket. The vote at town meeting that year was 446 in favor of establishing a Nantucket Land Bank and 1 opposed. And I will tell you, I know that one person, and he, I think in time felt, he had to justify his vote, and he just said, I didn't think it was a good idea. That's all. But that's how popular it was in the town of Nantucket. Well, it was established, and a vineyard conservationists looked over to Nantucket and said, this could be very useful on Martha's Vineyard. And so they approached the county commission in 1984 and asked it to charter a land bank study committee with 1 appointee from each town to examine the Nantucket law, tinker with it to see how it should be adjusted for the vineyard experience, do the research that's necessary, and then do the visiting. Go to each board of selectmen, each conservation commission, each planning board, and start to find out if there was, in fact, momentum to create a land bank on the vineyard. There was. In 1986, it was approved by the voters on the island. So when it was approved conceptually by voters, it then went to Beacon Hill for its approval. And the requirement was that when it came back to the island, it needed to be voted, the law itself, not the concept, but the law itself needed to be voted by the voters. And so in each of the towns it passed, but it was the law, the details of the law were all before the voters. And so the land bank takes a good deal of legitimacy from that vote because the island electorate actually literally approved the text of the law. Well, let's look at the law, and we're going for fun. We're going to compare the Nantucket and the Martha's Vineyard Land Bank laws. All right, here we are. I've highlighted Nantucket in blue and Martha's Vineyard in red, just for clarity's sake. And where something is in black, that means that the Vineyard Land Bank law is the same as the Nantucket law. Both of them call for the land banks to preserve ocean beaches, marshes, lands for aquifer and groundwater protection, agriculture. The differences are what are highlighted. In Nantucket, you see that one of the types of property that the land bank is due to acquire there is heathland and moors. That was swiftly taken out of the vineyard draft law because there are no sufficient number of heathlands and moors to actually justify its being in the law. You look over on the Martha's Vineyard side, you see instead we have forest land. You'll notice that Nantucket does not list forest land. And when I first moved to Nantucket I came from a very urban area, and Nantucket was the first time I had lived outside of an urban area. And I remember being astonished by how one could walk on ancient ways and old paths for miles and see no trees at all. And so Martha's Vineyard included the forest lands because we have the trees. And just as a point of semantics, I actually wonder if forest land is the right word to use. I have been to New Brunswick. I have seen forest. I do not believe that Martha's Vineyard has anything that we can legitimately call a forest. I think it would have been more accurate to say woodlands, but nonetheless, that's just a matter of the English language. Now look down here and see what is in red that the land bank on the vineyard has that does not appear in the Nantucket Land Bank law. F, land to protect scenic vistas. Well, Nantucket is plenty pretty, but the highest elevation is 1/3 of the highest elevation on the vineyard. There really aren't the same number of scenic vistas there that there are here. So this was grafted into the land bank law. And G, land for nature or wildlife preserves. It was very important to the Land Bank Study Committee and then voters when they voted it in, that the land bank properties also serve as wildlife preserves. And then I, let us compare I'll come back to J, land for passive recreational use. That is the core of the land bank's philosophy and legal requirements as regards public use. Passive recreation is hiking, swimming, sailing, fishing, hunting, nature study, photography. It does not include anything where rules are involved or equipment is involved, such as soccer, football, baseball, geocaching. Anything that requires rules and teams or anything akin to a team action is not passive recreation. Well, look over here, the Nantucket Land Bank does allow for active recreation. And so under F, the Nantucket Land Bank has purchased and created playgrounds, playing fields. That is a clear distinction between the two land banks. We don't do that by virtue of the law. And then finally, notice H here, the Nantucket Land Bank law says nothing about trail easements. Well, it's expressly written into the land bank law that we are to be looking for trail connections wherever we can. And as I'll explain later, one of the goals of the land bank here is to create over the course of time a north-south, east-west, coast-to-coast trail system. We call it the Green Archipelago. That a person could, for instance, start in Edgartown Center, hike towards the state forest, along the way, pass through large chunks of conservation property, and then take trail easements through private properties till the next chunk of conservation land, arrive at the state forest, and then do likewise into West Tisbury and Chilmark, take the bike ferry across to West Basin and hike up to the cliff. The goal would be that that person can accomplish that on trails passing through this Green Archipelago. So we do have a different mandate than does the Nantucket Land Bank, and we have been working on that mandate since the land bank's inception. Let's look at another photograph. Here's my photo for Gay Head. What you're seeing in the distance here is Menemsha Village. And one of the things that the land bank prizes is a sharp delineation where possible between town and country. A lot of urban planners do not like suburbs. They like cities and they like rural areas, and they consider suburbs to be bland areas. I don't share that at all. I think suburbs are quintessentially American, and I think they're absolutely lovely. But one thing is true, that when you're passing through a chain of suburbs, you do feel the sprawl. You seem to endlessly encounter development, whether commercial or residential. There is great value, I believe, in a very clear line between town and country. And so when the land bank was examining prospects in Gay Head, it thought of what it was like to stand in Menemsha and look across Menemsha Creek at Gay Head. And you notice there's no or very little development over there. And that may or may not have continued into the future. And the land bank didn't want to take the chance. So the land bank set about over the course of a dozen or so years, purchasing the properties that are on the west side of the Menemsha Creek. And we have succeeded. This is one of the properties with just washed up dory here. And so I thought that was an intriguing photograph. But next time you're in Menemsha, look across the creek and imagine if somehow some development had ever been built there. You'll see that as a result of the land bank's acquisitions, that will forever be wild. All right, how does the land bank do its business? Okay, I bet I'm going to be sharing with you something that very few of you know. When the land bank, when someone comes to the land bank office to pay the land bank fee, every dollar that is received is split in half. 50 cents of that dollar goes into the town from the town fund corresponding to the town whence it came. 50% goes into a central fund. The Land Bank Commission, which is the overarching organization, one elected a person from each town plus an appointee of the Commonwealth, spends that 50 cents in the central fund. That 50 cents can be spent anywhere. The 50 cents in the town fund, though, can only be spent by land bank boards that exist in each town. And so each town has a land bank board comprising appointees of the various boards in town. The selectmen get one appointee, the planning board gets one appointee, the conservation commission gets an appointee, the assessors get an appointee so that they can weigh in if they feel that the land bank is doing something that affects their tax base. And those town land bank boards have the control over that 50 cents and can decide where to spend it. Now, what I think is wizard about the land bank law is that it has this local control, and yet those town land bank boards are free to spend their money wherever they wish. They do not need to spend it in the towns that they are representing. And so the land bank has, over the course of time, purchased many properties on an all-island basis, where the land bank commission via the central fund and each of the town land bank boards via their town funds pool their money so that the buying power is bigger. And so that's how the Southern Woodlands was acquired, Wiscosam's Rock was acquired, Squibnocka Pond Reservation was acquired. Everybody participated. I will tell you that those town land bank boards also have a cross veto. The land bank commission may wish to buy a particular property in a particular town, but if that town land bank board does not consent, then that doesn't happen. That's the wizard part of the land bank law. There's a land bank commission with a regional perspective and a long vision, and then there is the local control that is exerted by the town land bank boards. But you'll be interested, I think, to see how this shapes up. When you slice out those 50 cents and allocate them to the towns where they came from, this is what happens. In fiscal year 2020, 50% of all revenues came to the central fund. You can see that there. This is how it's shook out for the towns. Edgartown, the Edgartown Fund, received 26% of all revenue coming from its 50 cents during that fiscal year, in contradistinction to the Aquina Fund, which received 1%. So it is not a level playing field when it comes to the funds that come each of the town funds. But because the land bank law allows these funds to be spent anywhere, that just gives the local control, but it still allows us to pursue regional goals. How about another photo? This is a charming one. And I wonder if any of you recognize this. This is Chilmark. This is the photo I chose for Chilmark. If you go to the Land Bank's Great Rock Bight Preserve, which is 1,000 feet or so of a beautiful cove in Chilmark, about 200 feet off of the beach is this giant boulder. And you can see the attention it attracts. There must be 12 people there. And I've done it myself. It's very fun to swim out there. You need to have the right tide, obviously, but it is fun to go out there and share that, that incredible vista from the sea looking towards the land itself. I'll take this opportunity to characterize the Land Bank's opinion about public access. The Land Bank has always said the top goal of the Martha's Vineyard Land Bank is environmental protection. And we characterize public access as a very important but subordinate goal. And so if you're on a land bank property and you see a trail suddenly veer to the right or the left, that means either you are being led to something very intriguing, or just as likely, you're being steered away from a sensitive area where there shouldn't be any public access. But I like looking at this photo because I think it illustrates how many times the land bank is able to provide interesting public access. All right, so how does the land bank make decisions? Here are the sources of the land bank's information. The land bank reads the land bank staff reads the town master plans and looks for goals that the towns have set in the master plans. Likewise with the town open space plans, they're even more helpful to the land bank. The Land Bank once commissioned the Martha's Vineyard Commission many years ago to prepare a Martha's Vineyard regional open space plan. That was very handy. And then every other autumn, the Land Bank has a public input session where we ask people to come. And the Land Bank says, we're happy to hear anything you want to say, but our primary goal, our hope, is that you will name names. Tell us particular properties that you think that we should be pursuing. As it happens, that's our formal biennial public input session. But at every meeting, the last item of business of regular session is to take public input on any matters. And if anybody has a land acquisition to recommend, that's a perfectly sound forum for doing that. And what all of this comes down to is then it gets distilled into a series of priority lists for each of the towns. These are confidential because a lot of landowners they either would not like to see their name on a list of what the land bank is pursuing, or the land bank would think that it'd be premature to let any of them know that the land bank is hoping to acquire their properties. I remember the first drafting of the priority list because I went shrew-eyed. This was, mind you, this was prior to such great computer technology. This was 1989. I looked at every single lot in every single tax book on Martha's Vineyard and prepared a list of prospective acquisitions based on that each of the town land bank boards then reviewed. It was a very tedious and very effective means of determining which opportunities were ahead of the land bank. If only I had had the technology that came 10 years later, I might not be wearing contact lenses today. But the land bank then has to decide where are its higher priorities. And this is the land bank's adopted conceptual priority guideline. And this is not a restraint on the Land Bank Commission's will. This is where the land bank is saying, generally speaking, this is where we think the land bank should be focusing its acquisitions. And now you'll see that they're blue and red. That signifies nothing other than I just wanted to make a clarity between the various items here. So one of the land bank's higher priorities is any vacant or virtually vacant coastal or pondfront property that has more than 100 linear feet of water frontage and upland adequate to locate a 10-vehicle trailhead. For those of you who don't know, one word that the land bank never uses is parking area. It just sounds too urban. And so we instead say trailhead. So when you see the word trailhead, the definition, if you were to look that up in the land bank's dictionary, is parking area, but that's the expression we use. A second higher priority is any vacant or virtually vacant property in excess of 50 acres, on the idea that it's best to consolidate large chunks of conservation land, and on the presupposition that you get better wildlife habitat the more you amass and coalesce together. A third priority is any active farmland or fallow pasture in excess of 10 acres, visible from a public road or a water body. Any trail easement connecting or potentially connecting land bank or other conservation lands. And any vacant or virtually vacant property in excess of 15 acres and bordering an existing land bank property. Here's what the land bank does not prioritize. The first is any property that's located in either a business, commercial, or industrial zoning district. Why don't I pause on that for a moment? When town meetings go through the effort of zoning land for non-residential use, for business or commerce or industry, it is the opinion of the land bank that that is a big decision, because that's an intense use and towns do not enter into that decision lightly. Well, if the land bank were to start buying land in a business, a commercial, or an industrial district, that will siphon off opportunities for development for those purposes, and in the end, create an incentive for the towns to expand their business or commercial industrial districts. Well, if the towns choose to do that, that's their prerogative, but the land bank does not want to be incentivizing the towns to do that. So the land bank stays out of those districts. And likewise, the land bank stays out of zoning districts here, whose minimum size is 4/10 of an acre or smaller, on the grounds that smart growth principles would call for infill development in areas that already are developed, that have public water and or public wastewater systems, and that if the land bank is plucking those opportunities away, it is just it is taking away opportunities for development where development really belongs. The second lower priority is any property containing a building, unless it's very, very modest in size, that cannot be conveniently subdivided off prior to acquisition. Generally speaking, the land bank does not enjoy buildings. Now, we all know, given the affordable housing crisis, that it is incumbent upon all employers, including public employers, to provide affordable housing for their own employees. So the land bank does have several houses, and I think it will have more in the future, cottages that can be used by land bank employees. But generally speaking, the land bank finds it agonizing to spend money on buildings when there's so much land to be acquired. So generally speaking, the land bank tries to avoid owning any properties that has a building, that have buildings on it. The third here is any property that's already fully or mostly fully subdivided to the maximum extent that it can be. And the idea here is an economic idea. There's two types, there's two types of commodities that there are retail commodities in this world and wholesale commodities. And the same thing goes for land. A retail lot is one that has been fully subdivided, the roads have been built, that property, that vacant property is ready for sale, and there's people who can buy it and build on it tomorrow. A wholesale property is raw land, unsubdivided land. Maybe the title isn't even good, but property that that is not in any way ready for sale to individuals for building. Well, the land bank always will prioritize wholesale land because that's where the public money can go further. Not to say, however, that the land bank refuses to buy retail properties. The land bank has purchased many retail properties, but it does so when those properties have such compelling features that it is worth the extra expense to the land bank. The penultimate one here is that the land bank will try to avoid buying a property if it feels that its predominant natural characteristics have already been protected by the Wetlands Protection Law, by the Martha's Vineyard Commission, by something else. If they're protected, then the land bank doesn't need to spend money to buy it. And the final lower priority is any single lot in a residential development that the land bank might be asked to purchase solely to obtain access to development amenities. Well, that's not something the land bank wants to pursue. Those development amenities belong to the subdivision owners. All right, next photo comes Edgartown. All right, you're looking at Sweetened Water Preserve. As I mentioned with McCoy Point, this property too had been subdivided into 6 or 7 building lots for summer houses. These, as you're driving, here's the best way, if those of you who don't know where it is, if you're driving into Edgartown Center and you're passing Morning Glory Farm on the right, you pass the farmstead, then you pass the Mashacket Road, then you pass the cornfield. This is the next property. And right after this is the little disc of Sweetened Water Pond that you all picture. So between the cornfield and the pond is this land here. This would have been 6 or 7 summer houses. And instead, the land bank purchased it and then restored the field The land bank's goats are very happy on this property. This is a very nutritious place for them to go. And this is just a very beautiful field that helps welcome people into Edgar Town Center. All right. When I was preparing for this, Mary Lou suggested that people would be interested in hearing about the land bank's various collaborations, because from time to time, the land bank purchases property in partnership with other organizations. And I should be careful about the word partnership. That means, generally speaking, the land bank does not commingle money with any other buyers. If the land bank and another entity wish to pursue a particular property, we strike an agreement in advance as to which entity will buy which, and then we show up, we subdivide the property, and we show up at the closing each with our own money. Sometimes there's a sharing of money, and I won't explain that to you, but you'll see from this that joint acquisitions or cooperative acquisitions or collaborations, whatever you want to call them, are a hallmark of the land bank. Since the land bank came into being, the land bank has worked to buy land cooperatively with the Chappaquiddick Community Center, the Dukes County Regional Housing Authority, the Island Affordable Housing Development Corporation, the Island Autism Group. That's one of our most recent. I don't know if you noticed the old child farm on the Lamberts Cove Road of West Tisbury. The land bank and the Island Autism Group bought it cooperatively, and the field has been conserved. All of the property has been conserved, but the field has been conserved and was purchased by the Island Autism Group, which will create a working farm for individuals with autism, and the land bank conserved the balance. The property is now called the East Pequasset Hill Preserve because the land bank is now using it not for farming purposes. Island Autism will be doing the farming. Other collaborations were with the Island Housing Trust Corporation, the Martha's Vineyard Historical Society, the Martha's Vineyard Preservation Trust, Massachusetts Audubon, Sheriff's Meadow Foundation. Recall I said a moment ago that we never commingle our monies. Well, here we did commingle our monies because these are conservation groups doing the same work as the land bank. And so part of the Felix Neck property is owned jointly by the land bank and the town and the Massachusetts Audubon. And then the Squibnocka Pond Reservation is owned jointly by the land bank and the Sheriff's Meadow Foundation. And then the land bank has done a lot of collaborations with the various towns. Here are the Quina projects, Chilmark projects, Edgartown projects, Oak Bluff projects, Tisbury projects. For instance, I'll highlight one in Edgartown. You've heard of Morgan Woods, the affordable housing development. Well, that was part of a 180-acre property that the town and the land bank jointly prioritized. And we arranged so that the town purchased all of the 180 acres and then sold back to the land bank conservation restrictions over 120 of those acres, and then kept the balance. And part of the balance was used for Morgan Woods for affordable housing, and part of the balance is right now being used as a solar array. Part of it is being used by the town for a well field, and then the balance the land bank is conserved. And then the land bank has, of course, also worked with the town of West Tisbury and with Vineyard Youth Tennis. And generally speaking, these are the types of reasons the land bank enters into these cooperative acquisitions, mostly for affordable housing. At last count, the land bank has done 15 affordable housing projects with the various housing groups on the island and the towns. For aquifer protection, the biggest example was the town of Tisbury, where the town wanted, this is 30 years ago, to protect the Mantor well. And so we sat down with the selectmen and the water department, and we just divvied up the land. The town knew what it had to buy legally, because that's where the well was. And then the land bank purchased all of the contributing areas around it, all to protect the aquifer. We've done cooperative acquisitions for general conservation and for general municipal purposes and for historic preservation. All right, I think it's time for another photo. Here's the Tisbury photo. I hope you like it as much as I like it. Ready? Tisbury. The land bank likes to lease its lands out for agriculture. And for many years, the land bank leased out the Tisbury Meadow Preserve to a poultry farmer. These are turkeys. You can tell, I didn't have to tell you that. But our arrangements generally are very, very positive with farmers. They are so glad to have land to farm. The land bank policy states that there's a flat fee for leasing land bank properties, and that flat fee is a whopping $10 per acre per annum. And I've had people come up to me and criticize the land bank and said, you people think that you know something about money. You could get a lot more than $10 per acre per annum. What's wrong with you? Well, the answer is we don't want to make money on these farms. The point of the land bank's farming policy is to encourage people to actually farm on the land, to take out of the equation the land expenses that they'd otherwise be facing, so that they can do their farming as they see fit, and that the land bank knows that its decision making was based on the best welfare of the land and not on any check that somebody might want to write to the land bank. On the subject of collaborations, there's an interesting one that could be coming up very soon. I imagine that most of you have heard that there's a proposal to create a Martha's Vineyard housing bank, to create affordable housing on a regular basis. And so it is being proposed as being modeled on the land bank, again, with the town land bank board, so that there's regional vision, local control, the same sort of fee structure would be set up. And so the land bank commissioners, hearing this, took a vote. They said, we know from our own experience that collecting the land bank fee and scrutinizing the deeds to make sure that all transactions are paying the correct fee, and then accounting for all that money and investing all that money, that is actually a big enterprise. And it's an expensive enterprise. The land bank has to pay 2 staff people to make sure that everything is done properly there. So the land bank voted to say, if the voters of Martha's Vineyard and if Beacon Hill create the housing bank, the land bank hereby volunteers to do all of the fee collection for the housing bank. We would, a person paying the fee would come to the land bank office, pay 2 fees, the conservation fee and the housing fee. Land bank would do all the accounting, and then on some regular basis, I don't know whether it would be fortnightly or monthly or whatever worked for the parties, the land bank would then write a check over to the housing bank for the funds that were from the housing fee. And what this will do is enable the housing bank leaders to focus entirely on their mission, which is to create affordable housing. They will not have to be troubled with any of the administrative facets of collecting and accounting and investing the fee. And that will be sparing them a good deal of effort and work. One more photo. This is my West Tisbury choice. Isn't that lovely? You might not be able to guess where that is. That is Short Cove Preserve, which the land bank purchased. It's on the shores of Tisbury Great Pond. So we're looking southwest at someone sailing on the pond. And then in the far distance, what you are seeing is Quansu in Chilmark. I love the colors, the geometry of the sail. I just thought it was a lovely photo. Well, let's look at one final thing, which is the land bank map. So let's pull that up. Because I want to, now that you've heard so much about the land bank, let's talk about whether you see the land bank as, we can see on a map the implementation of the land bank's various policies. So here we go. Here's the land bank map. All the land bank properties are highlighted in dark green. And so you recall that I talked about what our goals were and how we implemented them. Notice how many of these front on water, 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 over here, water, water, beaches right here along the Gay Head Cliffs. The focus on bringing people closer to the ocean. Here's the Great Rock Bight where you saw that, that photo of people on the boulder offshore. The other thing you'll notice, as what I mentioned about the juxtaposition that the land bank likes between town and country. Look at this band of dark green properties here. Well, what that is a green belt at the southern end of Vineyard Haven and the southern end of Oak Bluffs, for the goal of trying to create a clear, as clear as possible, a clear distinction between town and country, developed areas and undeveloped areas. And so you can see that had these areas not been conserved, they would be developed by now, and there would be no sort of change in the feeling of coming from the downtowns coming out into the outer areas. And then I think the other thing you'll notice is linearity. Recall I mentioned about the land banks trying to create trail systems, the Green Archipelago. Probably Chappaquiddick is the clearest one right here. The Cross Chappaquiddick Trail starts at Wasque Point and wends its way up to North Neck. But you can just see how all this aligns along a spine of a trail. You can see here that these are aligning along the spine of a trail. In Gay Head, now point out these gray lots here are properties that the land bank has purchased but not yet opened. But you can see, look at the linearity. Someday someone will start on the beach at Menepshabite and walk across the property, or walk across the town, and end up at the beach at the Squimnaka Pond Reservation. So I will conclude by bringing us back to where we started, because I told you I was going to do that, and here we are. What I will emphasize is the very bottom of this statement here about what the land bank is. The land bank is a rare breed. And I'm hoping that from what I've described, that you see how much of a rare breed it is. There's one thing that we all know about rare breeds, whether they are animals or plants or human beings. I very much enjoy the company of rare breeds. Rare breeds need protection because they stand out. They need people to defend them. And so we know we are a rare breed, and we do everything we can to help people understand what is rare and unique about the land bank. And I hope that if you ever have the opportunity to protect or defend the land bank, you will remember Rara Avis. That is the land bank. Thank you.
Thank you, James. That was extraordinary. Learned a great deal. And if you're willing, maybe we can take some questions.
I would love that.
Okay. Do we have questions? I'm not sure if I can see everyone. Anyone, if you have a question, raise your hand, please, but I can't see all of you. So
I have a question.
thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, Harriet.
Thank you for that. That was really, really super informative. You know, we all love the land bank, but we don't quite know how it works. So that was really great. I'm just curious about farmland. Is there any push for protecting more farmland, or is there a limit on the size of I mean, I think you mentioned something about farmland had to be a certain size in order for you to be interested.
Oh, no, it only had to be a certain size in order for it to be considered higher priority. But the land bank has purchased a lot of farmland that is beneath that threshold. The land bank will always be interested in preserving farmland. For one thing, we happen to love it. And for another thing, we think it creates, it's an economic issue, it's a scenic issue, and it's just good planning for the future that a region should have. It's a lot of opportunity for farmland. So you will always see the land bank pursue farms. And I will tell you that the land bank did an interesting one recently, which is Arrowhead Farm on the Indian Hill Road. And the land bank purchased that from the Douglas family, subject to a life estate. And so Mr. and Mrs. Douglas will live there for the term of their lives. And when they have passed away, it's the land bank's intention to throw a wide net and to conduct a search to find a farmer who wants to really put together an outstanding working farm there, because it's 35 acres. There's pasture land, there's cropland, there's a farmhouse that is in good shape. The land bank will really be in a position to lease that out to someone who can do an excellent job of creating a working farm right there in West Tisbury.
And until the demise of the Douglases, then the farm it's not really much used now. It's not farmed much.
No. The agreement that the land bank struck with the Douglases was that in the meantime, in the interim, the public has there's a public trail around the perimeter of it, so people can walk around the public trail, and the land bank is free to lease the far field. And so about 6 months ago, the land bank issued a request for proposals for people who want to hay that field, and we received a bid and have now entered into a lease. So that far field is right now being hayed by a land bank lessee.
Is that a field we can see from the road?
Let's see, you might have to, no, let's put it
Not
this
yet.
way. Yeah, you would definitely see it better on foot. You might be able to see it on the road. I'll tell you, if you're driving up the Indian Hill Road
Mhm.
and you pass the horse barn on the left, then
Mhm.
you pass the family's house on the left,
Mhm.
crane your neck, and if you can see the field, it'll be there.
Okay. And another question I have is the ancient ways throughout the island are kind of challenged. I am aware of I'm on the Ancient Ways Committee for West Tisbury. And even though we have these wonderful agreements that the land bank maintains some of them, I wonder if there's any push to maintain more of them. In addition, the other towns don't seem to be very proactive in maintaining their or giving recognition to their ancient ways. And I was wondering if you had any way to weigh in on that.
Okay, let's say, let's go back and let's go back and look at the list, just so you know what the land bank has been doing.
There was recently a problem with Rogers Path.
Yes. So
Right.
here's the list. Here's the list of the ancient ways that. Well, I should back up. Excuse me. That these ancient ways are old cart paths that have existed for many, many years, and they have, in many cases, public rights in them because they were been used for so long by the public. And so the selectmen in these towns are free, if they wish, to enter into agreements with entities such as the land bank to manage them. So we have a series of agreements with various selectmen across the island to maintain these trails for the general public. And so let me show you the list. Let's see, Holman in Chilmark, Holman Path. In Oak Bluffs, Old Homes Hall Road. In Tisbury, it's the Sailors Burning Ground Road. In West Tisbury, it's Old Courthouse Road, Old Homes Hall Road, Rogers Path, and Chickmoo Path. And so to answer your question, Harriet, the land bank is always open to adding to that list. And so if people would like to ask the land bank to pursue additional ancient ways, let us know and we will ask the selectmen if they are willing to give the land bank the right to do that.
Okay, and in specific, and I don't want to get too detailed, I don't want to waste everybody else's time, but the Rogers Path was quite decimated. Is there any discussion about repairing that, or how do we deal with that? The owner has really not been cooperative.
Well, the Rogers Path is an ancient way that the owners tried to shut down. And so the land bank went to the West Tisbury selectmen probably 10 years ago and said, if you, as the selectmen of this town who have the right, the standing to do this, if you go to court and ask the court to declare that the town of West Tisbury has a right to allow people to pass on this ancient way, the land bank will pay 75% of your legal expenses. We will work together to make that happen. And the end result was it went to the Commonwealth Supreme Court, the town won, the land bank entered into a management agreement. The terms of the agreement, though, and the court ruling is that the land bank has the right to maintain and allow the public to use the walking tread only. And so that's where the land bank's maintenance capacities are limited to, and that's what we do. As for what happens on the side of it, that's outside the purview of the land bank.
Okay, thank you for your help, James.
And
Actually, I wanted to direct James to the chat function at the bottom of the screen. There are 3 questions on there that have come in throughout the program. If you could address those.
Does the land bank have any prioritization for properties that primary importance is climate resilience or biodiversity? I don't know if you're aware of this, but one thing I think you should, if you're interested, take a look at is an endeavor that the town of Oak Bluffs and the Martha's Vineyard Commission are working on. You may have heard of something called a DCPC, which is a District of Critical Planning Concern. And what the town and the MVC are looking at is whether climate DCPCs for salt marsh migration can be created under the Martha's Vineyard Commission Act. And if so, that would mean that the town voters in Oak Bluffs and in Edgartown, because this is about Senjik and Tackett Pond, could designate certain areas where the DCPC is for salt marsh migration. And that if any of the landowners in that DCPC choose to ever sell their property, a right of first refusal would arise in the name of the town, and that the selectmen acting on behalf of the town could assign that right of first refusal to the land bank. And the land bank could buy that building and then undevelop it. And then that would create an opportunity for the salt marshes to migrate inland if and when they need to do that. I think it's actually a very exciting thing if it's something that can be created, because it would allow the island to plan for salt marsh migration. But at the same time, there's nothing coercive about it. The right only arises if that landowner was choosing to sell his or her property. If they don't put their property in the market, then the right of first refusal wouldn't arise, and they can continue to live there as long as they wish. So I think that's wizard because it's a voluntary action, and yet the end result is still climate protection. And so the second question is, are they going to do the hike of the island this year? You may be aware that every National Trails Day, which is the first Saturday of June, the Land Bank sponsors a cross-island hike where we walk from one end of the island to the other, usually 18, 19, 20 miles, sometimes as high as 26 or 27. It has been annulled twice, 2020 and 2021. And as for my crystal ball as to whether it will occur in 2022, my crystal ball is cracked. I don't know. The next question, who provides oversight of the Land Bank's financial system, or strength rather? Well, the answer is that the Land Bank commissioners review a cash flow analysis on a regular basis to see that they are staying well within their means when it comes to purchasing property. And then every year, the Land Bank's books are entirely audited by an auditing firm, and they always give their report to the Land Bank, and the report has always been positive. The next comment is the cross-island hike is amazing. And I'll say, yes, je suis d'accord. And the reason I think it's amazing is not only are people experiencing the green archipelago that the Land Bank and the other conservation groups have assembled, but our trail planner on that day arranges for certain private properties to be crossed with the landowner's permission. And so people are able to see properties that they otherwise would not be able to see. It's a one-time permission, it disappears, and people get to enjoy properties that they otherwise might not have seen. Next question, 2 or more years ago, the Land Bank bought property in West Tisbury next to and behind Nipatuck Farm with access off State Road. When will it be open to the public? This is property that was owned by a family for many years, and Robert Murphy was his name. And the Land Bank purchased it from his widow, Sheila Murphy. It's beautiful, 22 acres. And the answer to that is, there's just so many things in the pipeline. You remember having read, I am sure, in the newspaper that the Land Bank purchased the Squibnocket Pond Reservation in Gay Head from the Schlossberg family, 300 acres with a beautiful beach and access to the Squibnocket Pond. In the same year, the Land Bank purchased property that we call the James Pond Preserve. If you're in West Tisbury, if you go to the Lambert's Cove beach in West Tisbury and you've come over the dune and you've arrived at the beach and the town land is off to the left, the beach on the, on the right, forgive me, on the left is the Land Bank's beach. And so that is a very exciting acquisition. Our feeling is that the public demand, for lack of a better word, for access to new Land Bank properties will be higher for James Pond and Squibnocket Pond than it will for something like this addition to the John Presby Norton Farm next to Nipatuck Farm. And so I'm afraid that that is a property that will be unopened in the near term because the land will be busy opening other properties.
There was one more chat question that you skipped over. I can just read it. How are the Land Bank's public sessions announced and publicized?
Oh, we put it legal notice in the newspaper, but not everybody reads that. So we also put in a advertisement, and then the newspapers both pick up on that and put that in their calendars. But don't, if you know someone who has to something, tell them not to wait. Tell them to come to any Land Bank Commission meeting and offer their public input then.
And any other, is this another question?
Look down to the chat and see.
Okay.
I don't see anymore.
I
don't see any more there.
Okay, Well, I would like to thank you, James, for a wonderful presentation on behalf of the Garden Club. It was a year late, but it was worth the wait. And certainly the information you've imparted has been extremely interesting. And I think we all will have a better understanding of how the land bank works and preserves and protects. So anyone else? All right. Well, thank
So
you
my-
again.
For my valediction, I'll leave you with 2 words. Rara Avis.
Thank you. And you know, the Garden Club tries to do in its own small way what it can to help conservation efforts.
Well,
And
thank you.
if you look back in the history of the Garden Club, for a long time, it has been doing those kinds of things.
I know a little bit about it, and I agree. It's been impressive.
One of their first undertakings was getting a group of people to take a huge, ugly Coca-Cola sign down that I think was up by Allie's General Store. So we try to keep that going along with everything else.
That is beautifying. Absolutely.
Thank you, James, and thanks everyone. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you
Goodbye,
all.
all.
Bye.
Thank you, James.
Thank you. Thank you, Gay.
Thanks.